Okay, so welcome everyone to Farmhouse Classroom. Today's topic is going to be fermentation. So we're going to talk about some of the introductory topics that go with fermented foods. My name is Courtney Schober. I am the education coordinator from Farmhouse Kitchen. And we're really excited to be bringing another installment of Farmhouse Classroom kind of remote. So this evening, I am really excited to have two special guests that are kind of experts in the field of fermentation. We have Olga and Karen. Would you guys mind taking a minute to no problem. Just introduce. You got so excited, Olga. Why don't you go first? So please.
Oh my God, it's charged. So that's kind of a little tricky. So, my name is Olga Sardana, and I'm owner of Mama's Brew, which is a kombucha company located in Phoenix, Pennsylvania.
Oh, Olga, I'm having a little trouble hearing you. I don't know if it's your mic or I can hear you a little bit, but.
Oh, all right, let's see. Can you hear me better?
Slightly better. Slightly better.
Troy. Yeah, my husband said yell, yell. Can you hear me better if I yell?
That's better. I'm sorry you have to yell.
All right, I yell. My name is Olga Sardana, and I am a founder of Baba's Brew, which is a local kombucha company located in Phoenix, Pennsylvania. And kombucha, it is fermented tea. It is really a wonderful probiotic beverage that I've learned to make from my great-grandmother.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, Olga. Karen, want a quick intro?
I'm been involved with food production, foraging, and fermentation since I was pretty young. And I've been making all kinds of fermented products for many, many years. And today I teach different kinds of fermentation, vegetable fermentation, miso, nut butter, beer, cider brewing, and I'm absolutely in love with the bacterial world.
Awesome. I love that. So can each of you talk a little bit about how you got into and how you kind of got interested in kind of the respective fields and specific ferments that you like to do? So a little bit of your like personal history with it.
So I was born and I grew up in communist Russia. So the fermentation was one of the methods of preserving foods that my family have done. So, growing up in Siberia, we do have summer, and it's going to be really nice and warm. It's just very, very short. So the growing period is very, very short, and pretty much anything we can grow, we wanted to make sure that we preserve, and so we can survive throughout the winter. And so I just grew up that knowing that, we're going to harvest cabbages in September and we're going to make sauerkraut. We're going to, harvest cucumbers and we're going to pickle them, ferment them. So this is how, and then we always had a cellar, like a little root cellar too. So, a lot of fermentation have been happening, and what I also noticed with fermentation is not only extends the shelf life, but it also makes food so much more flavorful, and also gives us amazing health benefits. Just think about wine that I'm drinking right now. It's just a really basic grape juice that has been fermented, and because of this fermentation, and because how it has been stored in old barrels, it gives us phenomenal nuances and phenomenal flavors. And the benefits. So, for me, it was one of those methods that, I grew up with and it was essential to survive. So, just like Karen, I'm in love with anything fermented. Our tasting room, which we call a culture factory, cultures us to the people and all about cultured food. So there's probably no cultured foods I don't personally like. Maybe not natural, but everything else I absolutely love. And I think fermented foods add a lot of flavor, a lot of health benefits. And as a chef, I just, anything fermented, I just think it just gives us extra flair and extra kick.
Great. Karen, how about you? How about your kind of personal history, or even kind of, I know there's a lot, you talk a lot about kind of the local heritage here in Berks County as well, when it comes to fermentation too.
Yeah, I didn't. I moved to Alaska, and so I wasn't so far from Siberia. And I learned to ferment fish there, and yeah, preserve food without refrigeration. And you know, I grew up in the Philadelphia suburbs, so it was quite a leap. And before food industrialization, fermentation was the method of preservation, unless you lived in a place where it froze. And, Berks County was the seat of German cultural settlement. And it's funny, I'm amazed here, how few people really ferment. And I go to farms, as you do, all over the place. And it's incredible how we lost so many cultural practices. And it's interesting because the word culture refers to the bacteria, yeast, and scobies that we all use, but it also refers to the collective human endeavor in one place or another. And what happened during, just let's call it post-World War II to keep it simple, was the commodification of food. It was the commodification of breast milk. It was the commodification of all of these practices that were practically free of growing and preserving food. And, they were co-opted by industry in favor of convenience and, you know, convenience and availability. And, we're living in a fermentation revolution that was kind of started by the craft brew movement. I really got into fermentation in this past 10 or 15 years through brewing. And it's just so exciting to see people, the sourdough craze right now is just off the charts, and the kombucha making and everything that people want to learn how to do and learn how to grow gardens. And we're taking back culture that was taken from us. And I think, people are really sensitive to that. Yeast and bacteria cover every surface of our bodies, the plants and vegetables and soil. And, you can live in a very sanitized world without exposure to those critters. And, they're essential to our lives.
Yeah, we actually talked, last month we were talking about gut health, and we talked about the microbiome and those same bacteria, that's what you're talking about, like eating the dirt is good for you. And we did touch on that a bit. And so it is kind of a nice transition to go into kind of how this living food can be part of our lives. I just want to tell everyone that's joined, thanks for being here. And if anyone has questions at any time, please use the chat box, and I will field the questions to Karen and Olga as we go on. So feel free to ask any questions or any comments that you have that I can feed back to the group. And you can either do that to me personally or just in the chat box to everyone. So feel free to do that. That's a great introduction. Thanks, Karen. That was awesome. So a little bit about Olga, can you talk a little bit about your company for those of that are on the call that might not know about it? And
Sure. Yeah, Baba's Brew is a local kombucha brewery, and we're located in Phoenix, Pennsylvania. So we started 5 years ago. We turned 5 in February. And originally we started because, I came to the United States 20 years ago, and I was brewing kombucha on and off because I missed it. And when I was able to find some kombucha in the grocery stores, and by then it was just very, very few brands, I just couldn't really find kombucha I truly enjoyed. I just thought there's some was, too sweet, too sour. It's almost like, when you have your mom's chicken pot pie, it's kind of hard to find the one that's just right. So one time, my husband and I, we found ourselves in Santa Barbara, and we happened to be at the fermentation festival. So I mean, I couldn't miss that. It was the best part of the whole trip. And we went to the fermentation festival, and it's completely blew my socks off. Like it was, all this amazing carnitas and tempehs and the ciders and kombucha that it just took me right back to my childhood. So I said to my husband, well, why can't we just do the same here in Pennsylvania? That's just like Santa Barbara, almost. So, we went back, and he kind of ignored me. And I have a lot of homework that I do like on a daily basis. So I just thought, whatever. Few weeks later, he showed up with like a huge folder that he did all, business analysis, what kombucha brews in state of Pennsylvania, and who is doing what. And he said, "Here it is. What should we do? How should we name it?" So we decided to name Baba's Brew after my great grandmother who taught us how to brew kombucha. And for the logo, my grandma, she was a redhead, and her nickname was given by her dad, was my little red squirrel. So it was kind of very easy. We named it Baba's Brew with little red squirrel logo. And we found, place in Westchester, and it's kind of shared kitchen. So they have a big giant area, and then they rent small spaces for different artists. So when I reached out, they said, unfortunately, we don't have much space available. We only have 70 square feet. Being Russian, I'm not really great with feet, so I said, okay, I'll take that. So I only found out that 70 square feet is very small space. It's just like my closet. And so we took the space, and we started to brew our kombucha. Originally, we had 40 gallons, and then we brewed 70 gallons. So we took it to the Phoenix Farmers Market because it was our test, and I thought everybody was just gonna, stand in line just like in California and get kombucha. And just like Karen mentioned, I was very, very appalled to find out that most people had no idea anything about fermentation, and they had no idea what kombucha was. So when I tried to show them SCOBY and be very, kind of technical about it, they freaked out even more. So, but people tasted it and they liked it, and we sold maybe, I don't know, 15 bottles. And so I was a little bit disappointed, but I, thought, well, education is the most important. So I kept talking about it. And the next market, those few people brought their friends and more and more. So by the end of the market, we can sell it through, like 9 kids at full market.
wow.
And so it was very, very encouraging, just to, I thought maybe being ahead of the wagon is better than being behind. So it was a lot of fun. And after being in this tiny space for a year, we moved to 7,000 square feet in Phoenix, where we currently still are. And at this point, before COVID-19, let's say, BC, we've been selling our kombucha at 300 locations, including Whole Foods and Moms Organic Market and Whole Foods. So I'm just very, very happy to see that there is, interest and more interested to try fermented food because a lot of research have been done, as you said, Courtney, about gut health and brain and gut connections and such. So hopefully, the fermented foods will be more and more popular, and people will, not be afraid to taste it. And I also, the big thing is for me was to educate people because people often confuse pickled foods and fermented. And that's a really, every time I teach the class, I'm like, oh, I love it. Well, it's not to real fermented pickles. Then it's, that is great. But, so that's, I think it's a big learning curve, but I feel very optimistic.
Great, thank you. And Karen, I know you've been involved a lot with as far as the education piece. So can you talk a little bit about some of the education and awareness that you participate in surrounding the kind of art and science of fermentation?
Yeah, it's been amazing and overwhelming. You can, as far as education goes, I joined the Berks Homebrew Club in 2009. It was a brand new small organization with whom I'm going to Zoom after this meeting.
Awesome.
And we were 5 or 6 people, and that was 2009, in the fall of 2009. And I was brewing like crazy and wanted to open a brewery. I was very dedicated to trying to open up a farmhouse brewery. In the end, it didn't pan out, but in the years that have passed since 2009, we have 30 members now.
Wow.
And then I can cite, I gave a talk on vegetable fermentation at the Exeter Community Library a few years ago. 80 people registered for, it was a 2-hour, it was supposed to be a hands-on demonstration. And as the enrollment kept growing in the weeks preceding my talk, I went from a hands-on demonstration basically to a PowerPoint because there was no way to manage 80 people. And then I started teaching fermentation classes at the Goggle Works. And so, Olga has a very deep specialization into kombucha and its particular world of ingredients and bacteria and the SCOBY. And I am definitely more of a generalist when I teach, but the classes, first they were at Goggleworks, and then I moved to my home studio in Ole, Pennsylvania. And the interest is just phenomenal. And again, it's so connected to so many other ways that people want to take control of their lives, whether through decisions about diets and what kind of food you're going to be eating, so that people's interest in whatever it means for them to have a healthy diet and to have a lifestyle that fosters good health. If you don't exercise and you eat processed food and you take a probiotic capsule or drink a bottle of kombucha or a jar of sauerkraut, you're not going to get that far. But as these waves come and go, people expand their interest in this, learning about fermentation, and it ripples out into so many parts of life. And so, I teach classes in like fermented condiments. A lot of people don't know that Worcestershire sauce is a fermented fish sauce. Lee and Perrin's Worcestershire sauce is fermented, and I teach, miso making and making preserved lemons, and so you can go from you know, the broader, more common topics of vegetable fermentation, beverage fermentation. It's really a broad world, and I love teaching about it. I used to manufacture products and sell them, and um, I was a teacher most of my life, so bringing the education back and being able to do it at my home is really, really satisfying.
Yeah, to bring it home, to be able to broadcast it out and from the comfort of home. Yeah, that's awesome. So what are what have the gambit of classes been that you've offered over the years?
Well, for fermentation, it begins soon, so it's all seasonal and goes with the growing season. In June, we can begin doing pickle fermentation, which is, Olga pointed out, pickling is very, very different than fermentation. Pickling is making an acetic acid, making an acidic solution through the introduction of vinegar, which is a fermented product. Whereas fermentation is using the natural yeast and bacteria that live on the surfaces of fruits and vegetables and adding nothing but salt and water to make those bacteria come alive and begin digesting the sugars, starches, and proteins, and decreasing the pH to make the food safe. So summer vegetable fermentation is anything from kales and pickles and cucumbers to tomatoes and the earlier crops. And then I have you know, fall fermentation, which is where you get into the harder, longer preserved vegetables, from squash and sauerkraut to kohlrabi. All the peppers can be preserved. Yeah, the list is kind of endless. And then as the growing season comes to an end, we start getting into the condiments. And I started teaching nut butter fermentation because my vegan friends were using the nut butter as a cheese substitute. And fermented nut butter, well, any kind of fermentation not only increases the amino acids and the mineral content, but it also increases the bioavailability of those things for us. So if you eat a bunch of cashews, you've got a certain amount of, you know, fat, starch, protein, iron, magnesium. And if you take those nuts and put them in water with salt and puree them and introduce a little bit of bacteria via some yogurt, some kombucha as a mother or a starter, that finished product is, as we've all agreed, far tastier. It's far more nutritious. It's just a completely different world from the plain cashews. And you can even read nutritional panels. If you go buy a pound of cashews and then look at the nutrition panel and then purchase this vegan cheese substitute we call nut butter and look at a nutrition panel from a commercial brand there, you know, the difference is pretty amazing. So
that one was actually new to me too, because we were even experimenting with some of those nut butter cheeses, even at Farmhouse, and at home I'm doing the same, but I've never taken the opportunity to ferment them. So that's pretty cool. So can you use pretty much anything as far as adding that additional bacteria, like you mentioned kombucha, or what about like a Bragg's apple cider vinegar or something to that extent that has the mother in it already? Like you wouldn't have to start from scratch.
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Oh, so what could you add in addition,
Oh,
like to get it going?
yeah, and so with the Bragg's vinegar, so we deal with a wide variety of critters, for lack of a better word. Olga's variety has got this special name, a SCOBY, symbiotic culture of yeast and bacteria. Cheese is mostly mold. Alcohol like beer, cider, wine, and whiskey is yeast. Most vegetables are oriented toward lactobacillus fermentation. And so all these different kinds of fermentation work with different kinds of, yeast, mold, and bacteria. So with nut butter, you actually wouldn't want to introduce acetic acid bacteria that come from vinegar. They're called acetobacter. They're great for certain things. They're horrible for wine and beer. So if you got some nuts and pureed them and added salt and water, you could add a yogurt culture. You could add a kombucha culture. You could add a tablespoon of liquid from any vegetable ferment as your starter.
Okay, great. Awesome. I'll have to give that a try. Olga, can you talk a little bit about, as Karen mentioned, how your critters are a little different? And can you talk a little bit about scobies in general and like kind of how they grow and how they're born and if they can or how they die?
Of course. So I wish I brought one home. I thought about it as soon as I got home.
You should check out the Instagram feed, people. It's crazy.
I have big ones. They have Big Mother for Mother's Day. So SCOBY is it's an acronym and it stands for symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast. And it sounds really fancy and scientific, but it's pretty much bacteria and yeast that actually like each other for difference, and they stay together and they grow together. So it looks like a just big, I don't know, scallop. I would describe it. So funny enough, in Russia, kombucha, if you literally translate it, it's translated as the mushroom tea, which is completely biologically, microbiologically incorrect. It's not mushroom by any means. It's just, colony of bacteria and yeast. But it's a bunch of different bacteria. As Karen mentioned, one of the very common ones, acetobacter, lactobacter. There's a bunch of other ones, and that's the yeast. And the yeast is really, really close by molecules. It's pretty close to the brewer's yeast that you can find in beer. And during the process, what's happened, bacteria consume. So you start with a sweet tea. So you brew tea like you brew it for yourself, and you add some sugar. And we use, organic fair trade cane sugar. And the bacteria consume the sugar and produce the alcohol. And the yeast consume the alcohol to produce beneficial acid, lactic acid, acetic acid, glucuronic acid. So kombucha is natural fermented product because it does. It contains traces of alcohol. It contains under 0.5% alcohol. And a lot of people do freak out by this, but if you check alcohol level in kimchi or ripe bananas, it's about the same level. You can definitely make it a little bit more alcoholic if you want to. I'll give you a secret for that. But as to just want to be healthy, you can definitely keep it under. So just like a sourdough starter, it will be constantly keep growing. So if you keep it in the jar, it just forms little skin, and then it grows bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And when it's big enough, you can just give it to your neighbors. You can give it to your other neighbors, and pretty soon all the neighbors will drink kombucha. And also you can make other things out of kombucha, out of SCOBY. Like I have made some candied SCOBY, and I made kind of like a SCOBY leather that I use to make little lantern, or to make like earrings. So there's a lot of different things. You put this SCOBY into the mixer and some bentonite clay and a little kombucha vinegar, and to make a face mask. It's gonna look glorious. You don't need any other fancy thing. So you can make a lot of things with the SCOBYs, but just like just like in any specialized fermentation, like for instance, you have to have special culture if you make, Roquefort cheese, so kombucha, does have SCOBY. Um, there is another product that's very, very close to kombucha. It's called John. Um, and visibly SCOBY looks just like kombucha SCOBY, but instead of black tea, you use green tea, and instead of sugar, you use honey. So there's a different little, it's almost like, SCOBYs are us, or bacteria are us. We all have our little tiny preferences. And, kombucha SCOBYs, they just like black tea and they like sugar. The funny enough, they don't really change much the caffeine level. The caffeine level remains the same. So kombucha is naturally caffeinated. When we checked, it's about 6 milligrams of 12 ounces, which is the same amount as 1 cup of green tea. I don't drink coffee, so I'm still good with this, but I can go to bed easily. It doesn't affect me. But it is definitely, special culture. I got a really funny email recently with all the people making sourdough right now. So people have shortage of baker's yeast. Somebody reached out to me and said, I have no idea what SCOBY is, but can you dehydrate and make bread? I said, it's a great idea. I don't really think it's gonna work. So, each fermentation is a little bit different, and just like Karen said, there is a lot of natural ferments like sauerkraut and pickles. They don't need any additional special bacteria. They just use naturally existing bacteria that, natural and on the skin of the vegetable. But things like, the things like cheese and things like kombucha, or when you ferment wine, you have to pitch additional, cultures, either it's yeast or bacteria or both.
Gotcha. Awesome. Yeah, Olga, a couple of you are saying we're still having you're kind of cutting in and out a little bit, so I'm not sure. I mean, I can mostly hear you, but I don't know if it's your microphone or what. We're having some trouble hearing you off and on. A couple of people are having trouble. So, Karen, you kind of mentioned before about how much fermenting things can affect the flavor of your food. Can you go into that a little bit more?
I would love to. There's a reason that fermented products taste better than unfermented products. Coffee beans are fermented. If coffee beans weren't fermented, you would have these dry green berries that yield absolutely no flavor whatsoever. Chocolate, cocoa beans are fermented. Unfermented cocoa beans come out of a pod and they're wet, they're pasty, and they have virtually no flavor. They're put into a vat where they heat up, and the natural yeast and bacteria in them convert all of the sugars, starches, and proteins into other compounds. And in fact, I forget how many different kinds of amino acids. And so, and the same with tea. Green tea is all tea that comes from the Camellia sinensis plant is tea. Green tea is unfermented. All of our black teas, though, are fermented. And without going into the details of these individual fermentation processes, just those three products alone, without fermentation, wouldn't exist. Cocoa wouldn't. There's no such thing as chocolate without fermentation. And then when you get into bread, for example, one of the reasons in our more common products is something called the Maillard reaction, and it's simply a chemical reaction that involves roasting, caramelizing, or fermenting. And when you bake bread, that golden or browning on bread, part of the reason bread tastes so good is because of that crust, and that crust exists because of this chemical reaction that takes place. And the same when you brown meats. Imagine the difference between a quick cook burger versus a piece of meat that's been simmered for a day or three in its own juices and onions and wine. And so a lot of the flavors in fermentation come from the process itself. And there's a couple of words, when I grew up, we learned about 4 tastes: sugar, salt, bitter, and sweet. And in Asia, there was always what they call the 5th flavor, which we now know as savory.
Or umami.
Or umami. And umami is the Japanese word really for savory. And savory is the 5th element that we crave. And we just didn't have a word for it in the United States for many years. And when you look at grape juice turning into wine, I mean, the only thing that's the only thing that's happening is fermentation. And grape juice is well and good. I love this stuff, but a properly made wine. So there's the flavor.
That's awesome. Olga, can you talk a little bit about how you build your flavor profiles for your kombuchas?
Well, the big thing is, as Karen said, about the tea. So, Camilla is the one plant.
Yeah, I think people are still having trouble hearing you.
Gosh, I'm yelling. Is it better?
A little bit better, yeah. I don't know if I know sometimes, do you have a headphones or any? Sometimes that helps when you plug right in, but if you don't.
I have a headphone, but I'm gonna yell.
That's a little better.
Okay, good. So Camellia sinensis is, it's a plant, and it's a tea plant, and all these teas that we're talking about, oolong tea, green tea, sencha, black tea, they all the same plant. It just depends how much they have been fermented. Like for instance, green tea is just very, very partially fermented and blanched and dehydrated. So when you brew it, you just taste this, little fresh pasture and spring. And when you have a oolong, it's a partially fermented and it's a little bit more flavor that you can taste some violets and some meadow and some more florality. And then you go to black tea, it's fermented even more. So the reason I'm bringing all this, examples, because even the base of our kombucha, we use 3 teas. We use black tea, green tea, and oolong tea. So even the base of our kombucha has this variation of flavors. It's almost like, why some wines are blended, because you want to bring this, different flavors even on the base of your product. So we use all the 3 teas to make our kombucha. So right away there is a blend of flavors going on, and then we also use all the different. So at Baba's Brew we do not use no juices, no extract, no concentrate, just fresh fruit and herbs. And as a chef, just think about it. If you make an apple pie, if you just put apples, well, just apples. But if you put some clove and you put some ginger and some cinnamon, you get all these different layers. So this is what we try to do with our kombucha. Very, very, very rarely our kombucha just has one ingredient, and one of those is our hibiscus, because it's just nice, clean, and refreshing. But a lot of times, what I play is the combination of those berries of fruit and plus herbs. So you just bring this kind of savory component to the fruit. One of our most popular flavors are rosy apple, where we use apple and we use rosemary. So it's just kind of really cool combination. You bring all the savory and you bring all this herbal components of the herbs. What else do we do? We also play with how long do we ferment. The longer we ferment, bacteria keep consuming all the sugar, and your kombucha becomes more tart and more acidic, which is really nice and refreshing when you pair it with different fruits. So that's, kind of three different ways that we do. And as soon as we're done fermenting, during secondary fermentation where we add fruit, we chill immediately. So the fermentation stops and the flavors becomes, remain nice and crispy. And if you can compare with wine, for instance, the wine is kind of overcooked. If you, got the bottle and you left it in your car for 5 days, and it's like over 85 degrees, it's not gonna taste as fresh and as bright. So that's one of the big things that we do at Baba's Brew to preserve the flavors. I'm a huge flavor Nazi. Nothing is great for me to enjoy just a glass of wine or glass of kombucha or a bowl, big spoon of sauerkraut. I love this and I enjoy the flavors. And I just wanted to go back to Karen's mention in chocolate, because it's kind of really great bridge to people when you start talking about fermentation. People like, oh, I don't like, yogurt, and I don't like this. So I said, wine is fermented, cheese is fermented, chocolate is fermented. So then people are like, oh. So what I did last year, I actually bought fresh cacao pod and I wanted to ferment it myself. So I've done all these things. And when I was finished, I said, you know what? Whatever they charge for chocolate, they don't charge enough, because the process is very, very long and quite painful. And you can make so many mistakes cleaning this cacao pod. So anytime somebody complains about price of chocolate, they should ferment the cacao pod. That's my uh, that's my realization. So yeah, the flavor is definitely super important, and there's a lot of different ways to you know to enhance the flavors. I've been at the chefs conference last year. I mean, I've been this year as well, but last year was super cool because they have two chefs from Noma, which is the best restaurant in the whole world, and whole entire 2 days presentation was all about fermentation.
Yeah.
They were saying, we just want to use local ingredients. We complain local ingredients in Pennsylvania, and just think about Norway. So the way how they enhance all the flavors is also the fermentation. And the stuff that they showed, it blows my mind. You can get simple things like pine needles and a lot of stuff. And through the fermentation, you achieve this mind-blowing results. Like they did the spirit that it made the distilled miso. I mean, it's one of the best spirits I've ever tasted in my life. So, talking about flavors, fermentation is the way to enhance the flavors.
Awesome. And Karen, do you think it's something, I mean, and either one of you actually, it seems to the, the home cook, sometimes I think fermentation seems overwhelming, or like it's this, you have to have years of experience and you have to have all these classes and you have to really understand the science before you can try it at home. So what would you say to people that are kind of scared to start? I mean, I know I'm probably in that category. I've done a couple lacto fermented pickles, and I have a half head of cabbage that I want to, based on the inspiration from last month's classes, that I want to try my own sauerkraut. But what's some advice to people that you would give that are maybe just starting out or thinking about getting into it?
Well, what I say is that fermentation is ancient, safe, easy, cheap, and fun. And
A
all
good
you have
list.
to really, it is, it's ancient. Um, I think I'll skip any detail about that, but humans evolved with the yeast and bacteria that we use in fermentation. Every cavity from our vaginas to our ears are covered in the same bacteria that we use to ferment. Fred Beitbert, he's the head of USDA in fermentation, and he uses the term bulletproof in terms of food safety. So that should be hugely reassuring. It costs almost nothing to get a cabbage. You chop a cabbage, you stuff it in a crock or a jar or a plastic bin. You could put it in a plastic bag, it doesn't matter. You cover it with salt and you massage it, and that's the end of it. The mold, mildews, and beasties that can develop generally develop on the surface. And if I were a true beginner fermenter, I would definitely, look online. You don't really need to take a class. A lot of people feel reassured by a class. My classes are 3 hours, and you make a whole bunch of stuff. And the whole point of the classes is to just physically see the process. But even if you just talk to somebody on the phone who had fermented before, and call Olga and say how to do the kombucha, it really is simple. And when you're a beginner, you worry about food cleanliness and food safety. And I mean, if you want me to go into detail about what ferment, the reason that we don't get oh boy, the reason that healthy bodies have these orifices full of mucus in all over our body, and they don't become full of mold, is the same reason that you can make food that doesn't become full of mold. The bacteria work to fight against it. So I was laughing. I went to the White Supermarket in Ole when COVID began, and somebody, they hauled out the biggest bin of cabbages I've ever seen. I mean, this enormous, hundreds and hundreds of cabbages that must have been in cold storage, which, if vegetables have been stored cold, there can be an effect on the health of the bacteria that are in them. And people were buying these cabbages. They were loading up their grocery carts, and I was just wondering how many of them were going to take them home and ferment. But yeah, I'd say, I mean, anybody can email me anytime and ask questions. And, with the internet, there's so many great online tutorials. You really can't go wrong.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot out there. There's a lot of information.
Well, I can just quote Michelle Obama, and I can say, you can do it. You definitely can. So it's really funny because I teach a lot of classes, and there's been a lot of interest recently. So I just taught 2 classes at the library in Philadelphia, and I also taught at the Exeter 3 times, and it was the best time I ever had. But the interesting part, every time I teach class, I almost can have a game. I can ask, like, who in this crowd is gonna be like, I really wanted to do it, but I'm afraid to die. And it's really every single time. It's funny, but it's always happens. So now I'm like, every time I say it, and I actually make this joke, I said, well, who's here, who is thinking, I would love to do it, but I'm afraid to die. And there's a few people, they raise their hands. And right?
It's
So
like, oh.
this is, well, there's 2 answers. One answer, how many times do you open your news page, whatever, Google, whatever you do instead? This many people died from sauerkraut or
Right.
or there's nothing. It doesn't happen like this. And the reason it doesn't happen because fermentation, it's not only flavor development, it's also self-preservation. So the reason it works is because the pH drops, and it drops so dramatically. Like, for instance, kombucha is less than 3. pH is less than 3.0, which is unfavorable for most pathological bacteria to survive. Okay, so you pretty much self-preserve your food, and this is how fascinating fermentation is. Number 2 is, trust yourself. We just stop. We forgot how to trust ourselves. We've been given two eyes, a nose, and a tongue to taste and see and smell. If you make a sauerkraut and you open up and you're like, something fuzzy and green growing. I touched it and it's a little slimy. It doesn't smell good. Well, don't eat it. Something just went wrong. There could be different things and we can talk about it. It could be lack of sodium, it could be whatever. Don't eat it.
Yeah.
You really have to trust yourself. So there's a lot of times, every time I teach class, I give people my card. And sadly, this is how sad I am. I have my cell phone number because I don't have a phone. I'm always working. So I ended up with a lot of phone calls and lots of emails. So, people get emails of cute children and kittens, and I get emails that the food is broken, which is really adorable. And the most of the time, people saying like, "Oh my gosh, it might be mold." You look and it's no, it's a cute Scooby. So people have to really learn how to trust themselves. If you think something, doesn't look right, doesn't smell right, or doesn't, taste right, well, don't eat it. Discard it. You really have to trust yourself. It's exactly the same thing if you would work with any other food. You would never even think about, getting chicken from supermarket, open it up, and it's like, doesn't smell good. Let me just still cook it and eat it. You don't do that. So the same thing with fermented food, just trust yourself, and it's very easy. Just like Karen said, it's the most ancient way of preserving food. My favorite quote, which I usually start my classes, is the quote from the beloved submarine, which was ancient monk who was making cheeses, and he said that fermentation, it's a milk's lead to immortality. Just think. I mean, it's pretty freaking amazing, Yes, she's not immortal, but as far as milk concerned, it's pretty immortal. From 3 days go to, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Let's do that. So it's a lot of things, nobody dies from that, and you just need to trust yourself and keep making. You can screw it up first time, and you can learn it and just make a little, create a little notebook and write little notes. But just do it. Just like Michelle Obama said, just do it.
Yeah, I would, what Olga mentions in the drop of pH that occurs during fermentation. I use a microscope regularly. I collect yeast and bacteria from the air to make beer, and all of the vegetable fermentation that we do here in Berks County is natural. We don't add any culture. So for years, I've been watching whether it's a farmhouse beer fermentation or sauerkraut, and I put a slide under the microscope, and on the first day or two, there are millions of swarming, I don't know what, I'm not a microbiologist, I can recognize a few different yeast bacteria, but I can also recognize these, like, I just call them swimmers, and they could be Clostridium, they could be Salmonella, and they're present everywhere. They are present on most of our foodstuffs. And what happens is you watch the yeast and then various waves of bacteria basically conquer, and you see these pathogens shrivel up and die. The reason Fred Breitbart from USDA calls the process bulletproof is because there's no way for pathogens to survive the fermentation process. Now, as Olga says, if, once the process is over and you've got these products sitting around and they can last for a very long time, you see this blanket of mold. And, in the beginning, it takes some faith and some trust to get over, and some belief in science that tells you that these things are surface and that you peel them away just like a blanket, and then you look at the food underneath and it smells good. You take a little taste and it tastes good. And on rare occasions, I had a person taking a miso class, and I don't know what happened. There was maybe 8 or 10 people in the class, and her miso developed these long fingers of mold reaching down into the container. And it doesn't take much to go, well, she said it smelled too. And so just like, you just throw it away. But 95% of ferments don't go bad. And yeah, if they do, you toss them.
Yeah, I love that you both are kind of the common theme of trust your instincts and like go with your gut as far as if it's, if in doubt, throw it out. That's what my dad always said. He worked in the catering business, and that was always like a mantra around our house. So I always get at the house, something comes out of the fridge that gets shoved in my face, like, smell this. This is okay. But it is kind of a good practice to have, and to trust ourselves, and the same thing with food, that if it does smell good and if it does taste good, then you should probably eat it, and if something seems off, then maybe start a new batch.
Yeah, and that's one more thing. The pathogens that can infect fermented foods and bacteria are they're non-lethal. Botulism, which can infect canned food, canning was developed during the Napoleonic Wars to bring food to the troops, and it didn't catch on in home use in the United States until the Victory Gardens of World War II. And people began, canning like crazy. And there were real waves of botulism that killed people in the United States during, the 40s and the 50s. Canning kind of faded out during the 60s, and now that it's become popular again, I think the instructions are a lot more clear, and people are pretty sensitive to proper procedures with canning. But everybody thinks that canning solved a lot of problems, but it also created a lethal danger, which is not the case with fermented foods. Fermented foods, if could make you sick to your stomach, but there's no way they're going to kill you. No way.
And I think it's, just what Karen said about, canned food has its purpose. Originally, it was created to feed the troops. If you are somewhere right now in a place where you have a very, very hard access, but I mean, at least until very, very recent, we can have access to any food anytime. So to me, and this is kind of observation of the foreigner. I remember when I came to the United States, and the first time I went shopping, I went to this aisle of cans, and I've never seen so many canned food in my entire life. And the first can I grabbed, for some reason, was peeled potatoes. And I was like, what on planet Earth is that? Like, who would need a can of potatoes? I mean, it takes hot seconds to boil, and it's just really, really bizarre. And the consistency was just some kind of like a blue balls. It was really horrific. So, canned food has its purpose, but we have an access to amazing fresh foods, and if you want to have something to extend shelf life, like for instance, we are members of CSA, which I recommend for everybody to join. And sometimes you get way too much kale and way too much, other things. And the easiest thing to make super quick ferment. You expand the shelf. I remember like last year, I thought if I get one more kohlrabi, I'm going to really have a heart attack. Like I just have kohlrabi, every single week, like 3 giant bowls, and then eventually I made kohlrabi kraut, and everybody said it's the best thing they ever had. And it was devoured, every single time because we ate it as the, little side, as a condiment. It's just really, really phenomenal thing. So, at this point of our life, until you're really going to, war, or you go into some kind of, island that there's no refrigeration, other things, ferment your food. Make a quick little ferment. And as Karen said, there's a lot of things that you think fresh, you can extend the shelf. Like, for instance, I'm a huge fan of fermented tomato salsa. It's so amazing. It increases nutritional value of the product. And also, coming back to what Karen said, how much more nutritionally available, and how much nutritionally rich. For instance, what blew my socks off was, that sauerkraut has 600 times more of vitamin C than cabbage. Like, that's crazy.
Wow.
Who needs to buy this crap in the powder if you can make a quick sauerkraut? You can heal your gut, you can boost your immune system, and it's ready in 5-7 days. It's amazing.
That's
Magic.
awesome. Yeah, I was gonna say, to get back to kind of the series and the whole theme of our topics this year is food is medicine. So can you guys speak a little more to kind of the probiotic gut health side of things, and how fermented foods can have shown to be beneficial for our health?
I'm really wary of a lot of the claims, um, which is funny for a fermenter to say. I follow something called the Center for Science and the Public Interest, which produces a newsletter called Nutrition Action. And yeah, the studies are just not there. There's a ton of anecdotal evidence about the effect of fermented foods and probiotics on our microbiome, on our gut health, and now studies linking gut health to emotional well-being, to stress levels, to sleep ability. And I think a lot of us intuitively know these things because we know individual people whose lives have been changed by using fermented products. So I don't want to cast any doubt on their value, but the studies aren't there, and I certainly am not a doctor, and so I don't really know. But the one thing that I'll say is that if we go back to pre-food industrialization, beginning with birth, C-sections are isn't it more than 2/3 of births are a C-section today? And there are some hospitals where babies born C-section are coated with vaginal fluid, which is the very beginning of the microbiome after you emerge from your mother. And then you begin looking at breast milk and what happened to babies before breast milk was commodified and turned into a store-bought product. And then you begin looking at the whole range from exercise, in the lack of exercise in modern, now it's worldwide, it's not just United States, but the lack of physical exercise, which leads to poor sleep. And then you look at, how can you be healthy? How can your gut microbiome possibly healthy if you're eating processed foods and Coca-Cola all the time? So my biggest booster for fermented foods is that, again, it's ancient. We always, up until a very tiny recent human history, fermented foods were part of diets from the Arctic to the Antarctic, and that they're not there is alarming. And if you want to build the studies to prove all this, I would really like to begin seeing that. But yeah, that's my take.
Thanks, Karen.
So my take on this is, because I'm in the manufacturer, and so I also look at the laws, right? What can I say and what I cannot say. Like, for instance, for kombucha, I cannot even write it's probiotic because we're not physically adding some synthetic or purchase probiotic into it. So I'm very, very I always think very hard before I answer questions like this because I don't want to get sued.
Right.
It's really, really bizarre. But in the same time, as Karen said, there's a lot of anecdotal things, and I certainly believe in this because otherwise fermentation wouldn't survive. There's something about it that people feel good. I spent about half of my life in Russia and half of my life here, and I can really tell you that comparison between people who grow up where I grew up in Siberia, which is you can kind of think is 50 years. It's almost like a time capsule because it's a time machine taken back. We don't really have these issues, and you really see a lot of changes, in people's health, whatever you want to attribute to, if it's lack of exercise or whatever. But a lot of those foods, they're dead food. My always concern is, when I saw Wonder Bread, I was wondering why this freaking bread doesn't get stale, doesn't get mold ever.
That's a problem.
If the mold doesn't want it, why do I want it? It's a dead food. So, there's a lot of change in people's diet for convenience. Before I started Baba's Brew, I decided, so I have a doctorate degree in veterinary medicine, and this is how I came to United States. So I love microbiology and I love chemistry, but I'm also a chef. So to me, this nutritious, healthy life food was always really, really huge priority. So when when my kids were born, I decided, working in the restaurant industry wasn't quite feasible because, I couldn't really, come home at 2 o'clock in the morning every time to work every Saturday and Sunday. So I started my own catering company, and it's called Lost Gourmet, which is again was abbreviation for local, organic, sustainable, traditional. And we did sell our food in the farmers market. And I was so proud, we would make everything, super fresh on Friday evening to sell it on Saturday morning. And people were complaining that the shelf life is only 5 days. And I'm like, 5 days? I mean, isn't it amazing? Don't you want to eat it fresh? But people don't. They kind of expect it's kind of the same. It's the same drama between raw milk and pasteurized milk. It's the stuff about is it alive, and if it's alive, it's gonna go bad eventually. Versus something over pasteurized or over sterile. So answering your questions, I can't really say that hey, there's exactly studies, but don't you feel good when you have something really nice and fermented? I have raw egg, farm eggs and sauerkraut in the morning. I feel really fantastic. Or you feel, have a donut and you feel really hyper and excited for a hot second, and then you just kind of go, oh. So it's and it's have been studied. The other thing I wanted to say, when we had bird flu outbreak, one of the regions in China never got that severe cases of flu because kimchi was one of the most, staple foods in their diet. And kimchi is not only fermented, but also there's a ginger and cayenne because it's antiviral, antibacterial. And but just like Karen said, we cannot just eat crap food, lay on your couch all day long and just have, a bottle of kombucha or, spoonful of sauerkraut and call it, done. It has to be whole entire change in the behavior and attitude.
Right, your whole eating lifestyle, not just one thing. I know it's not that just because you have that one little bit of ferment every day is not going to counteract the, if you have other junk. It's like it should be integrated as part of a whole healthy eating style, right?
Right.
It just goes along with
Yeah,
it. It's like an extra bonus.
yeah, they're I mean, people are, counting cells inside guts in hospitals and research centers all over the place. And, one of the questions, is like, how long does the bacteria from a dish of sauerkraut or a bowl of yogurt stay in your system? And it's not very long. Um, and it's one of the things I was thinking about with this talk. I was working in the garden the other day, and you know, if you think of, just call it an outdoor lifestyle, um, or think of different kinds of places where you live, where you're more or less exposed to bacteria all the time, and um, there's all sorts of yeast and bacteria, outside in the soil, in the woods, in the fields. And, um, you know, it's not just the internalizing of the bacteria, but the bacteria that live on the surface of your skin. And we have a culture where, well, now with COVID, it's a different thing, but this constantly washing clothing and bodies and dishes. And, um, I sanitize my kitchen before I have these classes, and half of me is like, no, no, because I know my kitchen is just full of it's everywhere, and and that's really healthy. And then you go outside. I mean, I wonder how many bacteria per square foot of soil we have here in Berks County versus a park in New York City. Like, our fundamental exposure to these things is so limited in many cases.
Yeah.
I think it was really phenomenal study about microbiome, and you can they studied some people in not as developed countries, let's say, and they have a microbiome so much more diverse and so much bigger. And people here, and it starts with C-sections, right? And it starts with all this constant sanitization, constant bleaches and wiping. And again, I completely agree. It's really hard to say this right now because now we're in a completely different situation with outbreak. But way before that, I would go to the grocery store and see, moms wiping their kids with, Clorox sanitizer wipes. Sanitizing has its place and its space. Constantly doing this is definitely, it's almost like when you have a wolf and a sheep, and if you're trying to wipe something out, if you want to try wipe out the wolf, you will wipe out the sheep as well. So we really deplete our own gut flora, and we deplete the good bacteria along with taking care of the bad guys. So the goal is, how do you find this healthy medium? How do you do wipe out all these bad guys, but really still to preserve your gut flora? Because without this, you can eat healthy, you can exercise, but if your food doesn't get digested, you just have a very expensive bowel movement. That's about it. So it's a very, very important to maintain this gut flora. And to me, again, it's kind of really difficult because I do believe in the food being its medicine. And a lot of times when people ask me very certain questions, well, how many exactly counts? What exactly, how many bacteria? We do send our kombucha to the lab and we get the results. But because it is a live product, every single batch is slightly different, and I cannot give you 100% answer. So, but to me, when you get those live bacteria from the food, from real life yogurt versus from the, pills food, I don't really know how long they've been on the shelf and how they've been, stored from manufacturer to the store, but this is really my personal opinion. But it's much more difficult to quantify or versus you would get it from the pill.
Gotcha. You kind of garbled up at the end there, Olga, a little bit, but I think we got most of what you said. It's okay. Okay, cool. Thank you guys. So I know we talked a lot about history and a lot about science. So can you guys maybe pick like one of each of your favorite, like one history fact and one science fact that's your favorite about fermentation? Or is that like an impossible question? And also everyone that's on the call, we're getting close to like our 10-minute mark. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to put them in the chat box and we can hash them out before we end our class tonight. So make sure if you have any burning questions, please feel free to type them for us.
Well, the history fact is, as Karen said, the fermentation have been one of the most ancient methods of preserving the food. And I think they found some in, I think somewhere in Egypt in one of those, they found some cheese, which is, dated 6,000 years old. I mean, I doubt it tasted like Gouda, but, the entire fact is that, people have been making cheese is so long time ago. So, anytime that you think about it, oh, I'm not really sure if I'm gonna die. Well, people have been making it before, Jesus was born. So it's all good, it's all safe, don't be afraid. And if you have questions, give Karen a call. It's easy, it's delicious, it's great. And the science fact, once again, just the sheer, just compare it with, again, with Karen so amazingly said, just compare nutritional information of, solid, pure ingredient versus what comes out after you ferment it. There's really nothing better than, amazing chocolate or great, glass of wine. I mean, salami used to be traditionally fermented. So we just all skipped into this, long shelf and, for convenience. But, if you really think about it very, very deeply, there is, I would take taste of convenience anytime.
Awesome. Thanks, Olga. How about you, Karen?
A historical and a scientific fact. I do know that only something like 1% of all bacteria on the planet are pathogenic, and that the weight of all of the bacteria on the planet is more than the weight of like insects and animals. There's a lot of bacteria on this planet, and almost all of it is friendly. And a historical fact that I think is really interesting is that like some people are curious about why salt so often plays a role in food fermentation. And the reason is that salt and bacteria formed a symbiotic relationship millions of years ago. And, bacteria have migrated all over the planet. I just read a book called You're Never Home Alone. And it's about all the microscopic things that live in your house and on your body. And um, the um, like in a typical dishwasher in a house, there are bacteria. In fact, there are more diverse bacteria inside that dishwasher than almost any place on earth. And
Wow.
all of those bacteria came from places like under the sea or salt mines. They 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 get carried around by, just the way viruses do. And so I thought that was really fascinating. And in the case of lactobacillus, lactobacillus, that particular bacteria that we're talking about with food fermentation, it evolved in salt mines, millions of years ago. And salt is the first trade, right? It's the first good. It's the first product that people needed to stay alive, and um, it does exist. We had salt springs in Pennsylvania. Salt, it comes from the American desert. It comes from the Himalayas. It comes from volcanoes all over the world. There's sea salt. Salt is, we can't live without it. And it so happens that one of the most, without bacteria, you couldn't have fermentation. Without salt, you couldn't have fermentation. Without either one of those, you couldn't have life, at least a long time ago. We've got a lot of substitutes today, but I think that's what I had to say.
That's awesome. Does anybody have any other questions for these wonderful ladies? I thought that was, thank you guys again so much for joining us and sharing your expertise and your stories and your knowledge. It's been really a great conversation and interesting to hear all about your love for this great art and science. I'll just wait a couple. Does anybody have any questions? They're just really quiet tonight. You covered all the bases, I guess. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up. Again, thank you guys so much for being here, and we really appreciate you taking the time to lend yourselves to Farmhouse Classroom. And we will have another episode at the end of this month. So if you want to come and join us, feel free. If not, no worries. We're going to have Essie making some bread for us and talking about kind of the bread and the sourdough side of things and the fermentation on that side. But thank you all for joining us. And we're going to continue to do these. If anyone has suggestions for topics that you'd like us to cover, or even know of some local experts in food as medicine, please let us know. And thank you guys all for being here. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you all next time. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much for inviting.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.